Okay, hi, let's get started. Nice to see you all today. So, today we are going to continue our process of, we've been doing a composition sequence the last couple of weeks. We did a Writing Better Melodies class. Last week was Writing Better Chord Progressions. And today we're going to talk about arranging, writing better arrangements. So, to get started for today, you need some chord progression. And I've written a couple. If you don't have any from your own work this week or from last class, you can go down under today's class and download this session that I'm starting to work from that just has a couple of simple sequences in it. So go ahead and do that. You may also want to go grab, I should have done that. Grab some past chord progression that you have or write one yourself. And we'll get started in just a second. I'll give you a second to do that. Okay, so we're talking about arranging today. What do I mean by arranging? Let's make a distinction between the song and the arrangement. So a song has distinctive and specific elements like a chord progression, a melody, lyrics. But a song can exist in many different arrangements. So an arrangement is the specific presentation of the song. That's what instruments play which notes when. So think about how cover songs work. It's the same song when somebody covers it, but it's expressed in a different way. Maybe it's on different instruments. Maybe those instruments even play different parts. So think about the song as a deep structure in the background of a piece of music, and the particular arrangement as its realization. So, in other words, to arrange is to take an abstract general picture of a piece of music and make it specific. So arrangement is where our music becomes unique. If you go to the abstract background essence of most songs, it's going to sound generic. As an example, I want to play this chord progression for you. Make sure you're getting my sound. Yeah. Okay, so here's a chord progression. Super common chord progression, not very distinctive. It's just one chord held while the bass line steps down chromatically. Tons of songs have bass lines like that. But I can take the same notes and make them more specific. So I'm going to take those same notes and just play them in a specific order. Instantly recognizable Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Same background chord progression. what makes it distinctive and unique isn't something crazy about chords. It's not like using unique basic materials, but it's a very specific presentation of those notes that happen in a very specific order. So that's what we're doing today. We wrote chord progressions last time, and they all sounded like perfectly nice, and some of them had really nice extra details that we devised. But they did sound kind of generic, right? There wasn't anything particularly exciting about them. That's fine. When you write chord progressions, yes, it's possible to write super beautiful chord progressions in their simplest versions. But most of the music that we hear are simple chord progressions that may not sound like much when they're in this kind of realization. But what's exciting about them is how they're arranged. What instruments play what parts, what the sounds of those instruments are, rhythm. So that's what we're going to do today, how to take a background structure like this and write parts for different instruments that suit those instruments and fit in with the overall structure. So I get a lot of questions from people in lessons about how do I fit the parts that I'm writing together. Maybe you write a bass part on one track, and then on another track, maybe you pick a different synthesizer and you try to write a part that fits in with the bass track. This is an answer to that question. It's not the only answer. There's lots of ways to write music, of course. And in some ways, the method of writing that I'm showing you in this process is a little straight-laced. Like, we're going to be very careful and precise with our method so that everything really, really, really locks in together. An improvisational method of doing things by ear is also good, and I think probably in the final, in real life, what you're going to do is a combination of the two. But I'm going to show you today some tools for writing parts of different types of instruments that are guaranteed to all fit together. So we'll start here. There's a couple of things that Ableton does to make this easy for you, and I'm going to walk us into a couple of those right now. So first, we're going to work in arrange view rather than in session view. So if you've got your chord progression here, maybe drag it over. Let's see, which one am I going to use? Cool, I'm going to do that one. Nice and long, a good amount of time on each chord for other things to happen within that context. You don't want to have a chord progression where the chords change too fast. Usually harmonic rhythm is a lot slower than surface rhythm, like your instruments, and it usually moves in really predictable units, like a chord every single bar, or a chord every 2 bars, or a chord every 4 bars, maybe a chord every half bar. Okay, so I'm going to take this chord progression and bring it over into arrange view. So to review, you just pick it up like you're dragging it somewhere, and then drop it. Well, my view over here is a little messed up. I'm going to give myself some space. So you'll pick it up, hit tab, and drop it on the other side. And then it'll be gray because this mode is still active. So to make this mode active, we have to hit the orange button up here. So go ahead and do this. Take your chord progression, move it over into arrangement view, and hit the orange button to activate arrangement view. I'll give you about a minute to do this. So what we're going to do is think about this layer as our background template structure. We're not actually going to have, in our final arrangement, we're not actually going to have this instrument playing exactly this part. We may have a part playing something similar, but for now this is just going to be like our harmonic guideposts. So we are going to walk through a couple of common instrumental roles, and I'll talk about their basic job description. What makes a bass part a bass part? What does a bass do differently than a keyboard part or a lead part or an arpeggiating plucking part or a pad part? What makes these different? These aren't just categories of sounds of instruments. They're also instrumental roles. Each instrumental role is going to interact with this same structure and realize some aspect of it in a different way. And that way is going to be defined by the strengths and the weaknesses of the instrument, the characteristics of the style of the music, and the personality of the performer, which is something obviously we're not doing here because we're the performer of all of these parts. But in a normal live band setting, each musician is largely responsible for their own arrangement of their own part. And so you get different stylistic personalities in the mix between the different instruments as well. So we'll capture a little of that also. I'm not doing anything in a particular style of music today. That's definitely something we could go into deeper in some private classes or something. But yeah, I'm not really thinking about style today, but of course, what instruments happen and what kinds of things that they play in relation to each other is extremely style dependent. So today we'll just talk about basic principles. So first we're going to write a bass part. So I'm going to make a new MIDI track, Command T to make a new MIDI track. I'm going to pick a bass sound that I like. Doesn't matter what, as long as it's low and probably only plays one note at a time. So I'm going to get myself set up and then give you a moment to get set up. So first I pick a bass sound. Please do not spend a lot of time doing this. You can always change it later. Just pick something that will work. Maybe you do everything just with pianos and find sounds later. And then next I'm going to select exactly the same amount of time as my progression. It has to be exact. And then I control click and say insert MIDI clip. So now I have a second layer that's exactly the same length as the first layer. And I'm going to select this amount of time and do Command L to loop it. So what I'm about to show you is new in Ableton 10. So if you don't have Ableton 10, you can't do exactly this, but you can still apply these ideas just in a slightly different workflow. So check this out. If the two MIDI regions are the same length, I can select both of them by clicking on one and then command clicking on any others that I want to add. And they're all visible here in one editor. And you can switch between them by clicking on these bars up here. So this is my background chord progression, and now if I write notes, it's on this track. And then I can click here, and now if I write notes, it's on this track. And I can even copy from one and paste into the other, all right here. And I can switch from one to the other just by clicking a note from one to the other. So I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to do this. So to recap, if you got it, jump ahead and go ahead and do this. If you want to hear it again, here it is again. You're going to make a new bass track, find some bass instrument, select the amount of time that matches the chord progression, create a MIDI clip. So you control click and say, insert MIDI clip, Command Shift M. You could also double click to create one and stretch it out, and then Command J to glue it all together. But anyway, you got to get a MIDI region exactly the same length, and then select both of them, and then experiment with flipping between the two views. I'll give you 3 minutes for this. Please let me know if you have questions or if you are done and you get bored. Okay. Ready, set, go. Okay, come on back. So let's talk about bass lines. So a bass player has a very clear job description in a band. A bass player needs to play the root notes of the chords on the downbeats of each bar, or at least the downbeats of every change of chord. This is a bass player's basic responsibility. Of course, you can play with this. All of this is stuff that you can mess with and do interesting things with. But the basic role of a bass player is to show when the chord changes and to give a really solid foundation of the chord by playing the root, mostly. So let's start by, I've got my bass track selected. And so it's the purple one. And I'm going to do just that. I'm going to make a note at the beginning of each. So you'll notice that when you click on a note that exists in another layer, you switch to another layer. This is kind of annoying. What I would really like to be able to do is see that note in the background and just create a note on top of it. But short of that, here's what we're going to do. Make a new note somewhere else, and then drag it. So I've done my bass player duty on this first chord and played a strong downbeat. The rest of the time that the chord is held, I'm more free. And my other job as a bass player is to provide some kind of consistent rhythmic propulsion for the music. So I'm going to use my freedom here to do a little animation. I've got my downbeat strong, and I can jump around to different notes provided that those notes are in the chord. So I'm going to pick a different note of the chord up here and then transpose it down to get it into my octave. So this is how I can use my notes up here as a guide for what are the notes in the chord. So bass players got to play some kind of repeating rhythmic figure that uses mostly the tonic, but sometimes different notes of the chord. So I'm gonna do something like this. I'm gonna make it a little more rhythmically interesting by taking things off the square beats. Bum, bum, bum. And now that I've made this, I can tell that this bass note, just this bass instrument, is super low already. So I'm gonna select these notes and bring them up an octave. All right, I want a more interesting rhythm here. So I'm gonna do some shorter notes. Maybe I'll keep this rhythmic pattern. Dun, 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 dun. I feel kind of coming off the offbeat. Maybe use these two notes here at the end. That's nice. Okay, so my bass part has some rhythmic propulsion, some space, a little bit of melodic variety by using one of these notes. And so that's going to be my basic idea that I then copy. So remember, this was all down here. I'm going to build the whole thing in this octave so we can see it track here, and then we'll transpose it up. So this, I'm going to keep this idea and repeat it through this chord progression. So I'm going to drag it here. So this note happens on top of that. I'm going to move this one here, and then I need a different chord tone up here. I can match it to this guy and then transpose down an octave. Remember that shift down arrow. And then maybe I'll take this idea and move it here. And now maybe to make kind of a phrase that accelerates, I'll just take this idea and this down here, and then maybe repeat this again, here, here, and here. Well, maybe take this kind of closing idea and drop it here. So again, every time I'm copying one of these things, I'm doing it by selecting it and holding down Option and dragging. So I've just done my bass player duty of being really clear about the bass notes. So I'm doubling the bass note of our chord progression. I'm giving a little melodic variety. You can do more experimentation with this, of course, but I'm giving it a clear rhythmic idea also. I'll transpose all this up an octave, and we'll hear. And then just like whenever you start to get tired of a pattern, make a little change to it. Cool. I realized that was a lot. I hope that the basic principles are clear. And I'm going to give you now 5 minutes to make a bass line that tracks the root line of your chord progression, has some kind of repeating rhythmic figure, maybe does some extra melodic stuff. And, that can be chord tones. If you're leaping to things, it's good to use chord tones. But you can also do neighbor tones, and you could do passing tones like we talked about last week, where we're just like connecting the dots along the scale. Like that. Okay, so I'll give you 5 minutes to work on this, and please hit me up with questions, or if you want to see anything again, let me know. Yeah. Okay. Come on back. I'll answer a question here. So I just wrote in my notes here, basic rule, leap to chord tones, step through non-chord tones. So chord tones are the notes of your background chord progression. A leap is any, I'm going to unfold here. No, what the heck, unfold. A leap is any time a line goes from one note to a different note with space in between. So these are steps because they're all next door neighbors, and these are leaps because they are not next door neighbors, right? So here's a fundamental rule of harmony and how lines fit in with and project a sense of harmony. When a line leaps, the note that it leaps to and the note that it leaps from get harmonic weight. If I were to play this sequence of notes, they are going to project a chord that is this chord. If this chord is different than this chord, which everyone else is playing with, then they're all going to sound like wrong notes. So you can play these notes that are not chord tones, but you don't want to make them sound like they are chord tones. And when you leap to something, it makes it sound like a chord tone. Just maybe not the right chord tone. So it's totally fine to, like, say we have this bass track, jump around. Jump around within the chord tones. And it's a great thing to do. And then maybe move things up or down an octave. That's fun. I could take this whole complex and move it and copy it through, but so if you're going to be jumping, jump to a chord tone. But if you want to use the notes in between the chord tones, which are great notes and useful, you just want to approach and quit them by step, or at least approach them from a chord tone. If you approach and leave them by step, they're the smoothest. And if you just approach them or just leave them by step, then they're a little less smooth, but they're kind of smooth. So these are all a little too fast for us to hear. But say I jump up to, I want to do a jump after this. So I jump up to here. And then if I want to get to this G note, I can use these notes in between if I'm stepping through them. If I just leap to these notes, then they're going to sound like chord tones, but chord tones at odds with these chord tones. I hope that was clear. This kind of distills a whole bunch of counterpoint technical rules down to their very essence, which is if you're going to leap to notes in the chord. If you want to use other chords, step into them or out of them or both. Okay. So hopefully you've got a bass line here that mostly emphasizes the root notes, has some decoration, and propels the rhythm in some way. Next, let's think about another instrumental role. So the next one on my list is the pad. So a pad, this term comes from synthesizers. It's a certain category of synthesizer sound. And it's that sound is long and sustained and usually has kind of a slower attack, which is good for putting things in the background of our 3D space. A slower attack, and it's just like it's for long tones. maybe a long tail on it as well, so there's some kind of like nice overlap. It's a synthesizer category, but it's also a core element in orchestration of all kinds. If you go back like to the symphony orchestra, the brass, especially the horns, they are the pads of the orchestra. Yes, occasionally they play melodic stuff, but most of the time they are just playing a close four-voice realization, just like we worked on all last week, good four-voice realizations. They're playing a four-voice realization of the harmony that is being animated by all of the other parts. So their function is to glue the sound all together and create a harmonic warmth in the structure for everyone else to play off of. The same thing is true in any style, in any sound world that you want to work through. It's really great to have some background layer that is doing the harmony in a kind of a clear way to create a harmonic context for things to work in. It's part of making a good 3D space in our arrangements. So a pad is going to play basically this. Maybe not the bass line also, because we want to leave space in the low frequencies for the bass to shine. So I'm going to make a copy of this. It already has a kind of paddy sound. And I'm just going to do a little bit different with it. I'm going to take out the bass line, considering that the bass line is covered. And I'm going to bring it all up an octave. Well, maybe I'll try actually taking the middle voice up an octave to give it a wide spacing. So I might put it up for my chorus and down the octave for my verse, something like that, to have some variety and energy levels. But yeah, let's see how this low interacts with my bass. Sounds good, and it doesn't feel like it's in the way. So I'm going to call this my pad track, and this my bass track. Remember Command R to rename anything. And that's my pad. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes, because this is kind of easy, to take your chord progression, give it a pad sound, and maybe change the disposition, which means like what order the notes are in and what octaves. Maybe cut the bass part since it's already covered. Ready, set, go. Meanwhile, I'm going to take this cool idea and propagate it through my chord progression. come on back. Cool, so I just liked this little decoration that I did. Sounds great in a kind of a synth bass like this. And I just copied this structure and moved it up onto this chord and onto this chord, and then I did a little extra detail where I copied it twice at the beginning of the bar and then transposed some octaves to randomize a little bit. And then I'm just kind of going by ear, fixing things that sound bad, trying to find things that feel right. Okay, so let's make the next kind of part. So the next one that I want to do is called different kinds of things. They may be presets in your synths for different, for ARPs or plucks. Basically, these are just any short sound. I guess it's not one of the Ableton categories, but any, guitar unplucked. Basically, any short sound can be used in this role. And the way it's going to be, sorry, I got distracted. The role of this kind of layer is to play an ostinato. So an ostinato is any small, simple repeating pattern. It's going to, it can be like an arpeggiation in a real simple way of a chord, which just means like playing a pattern, bouncing between the notes. Or it can be a little melodic idea that cycles through, but is short and repeats a lot. So I'm going to make one of these. I'm going to make a new track. I'm going to pick one of these plucked sounds. And I'm going to set myself up by selecting the amount of time that I want. It's got to be exactly the same as my guide track here. I'm going to insert MIDI clips, control click, insert MIDI clip, and then select these two tracks. And cool. So I'm going to write my arpeggiation here, my ostinato. I want it to, so I'm going to leap two chord tones. But I want to do a mix of, so this is just an arpeggiation where we're bouncing between notes of the chord. And I want to do a little melodic idea here too. And then maybe think about adding some rests in it, some space, so to create a kind of rhythmic counterpoint with my bass part. Make it maybe a 2-bar phrase. So here I'm doing a kind of mix of thinking. I could do it two different ways. I've got a new chord here. Oh no, it's the same chord, just flipped. Okay, so we'll stay on this one chord. It's a little square rhythmically. So I'm taking things off of of the beat. Cool. So there's a couple of approaches. One, with an ostinato, you can try just copying it against all the chords. It may work and create a nice tension against things. So let's just hear this. So that sounds great all the way through. And if you're working in a single scale like this, you more often than not are going to find that this works. I might want to take it up an octave. Now we're talking. But say you've got a couple of notes that sound weird or one chord that sounds weird. I'm going to show you also how you can adjust the pattern once you create it across a long span like this. Adjust the pattern to fit your different chords. So one way to do it might just be to move it. And now this one. So our bass note moved up from a C to an F, so I want to move the bottom note of this also up that same amount of space. Of these ideas that's kind of related to our voice leading idea, which is to see that each of these parts as a voice and try to fit it in smoothly with the ones above. So here it might be helpful to have this in 2 octaves. So this you might do kind of whenever you need to see your guide structure in multiple octaves. I'm going to just do my trick of selecting Command C to copy, transpose up an octave, shift up arrow, and then paste to replace. And now I have my whole harmonic lattice here in 2 octaves. So now I can see maybe I want to move just some of these notes to their nearest chord tone. And what this is going to do is have the ostinato project the harmony as well. So this is a couple of notes that are near chord tones but not on chord tones. Making a kind of a nice melody of our top purple notes with a curve. And then I see these are near chord tones but not on chord tones. So maybe something like that. And I don't know, maybe move some of these on to chord tones to give a little variety at the end. So as usual, I feel like a broken record about this. When you're making phrases, repeat something, change something. Repeat something, change something. So we've got this basic idea that happens once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. But it's a little different each time. And then just to round out a phrase to make the whole thing feel like a unit, do something special at the very end. And that's going to really give you a kind of a turnaround into the return, like a drum fill. Okay, so we are at an hour. I'm happy to stick around and do another part or two if you want to stay. If you need to go, just check out ideas for keyboard and lead, and then you have the basic ideas for writing parts that behave in different ways with a different mix of melodic, stepwise motion and leaping motion and different rhythmic contributions to the overall rhythmic counterpoint. And you want variety and range, so you have a mix of high sounds, medium sounds, and low sounds. You want a mix of lengths of notes. You want some parts that move slowly and some parts that move quickly. And so by taking a background structure and writing a bunch of different parts that approach all these parameters with some variety, so that every one of your instruments is articulating the same chord progression, but doing it with a different personality. That's how you make really tightly connected, but also multi-dimensional, deep, interesting musical textures. So I'm going to stick around here. I'll answer questions. I'll do another one or two of these if you want to watch and do on your own. But for those of you leaving, thanks so much for coming by. I teach here Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. You can see past classes by clicking the videos tab above. You can also subscribe to me on YouTube. I don't think I have the link listed here. I'll paste it here below in a minute. But yeah, I do this for fun. So it's really awesome for me to hear from you and hear that it's helpful. You can also drop some money in the hat with a PayPal link down below, and that'll help me keep doing this even as I start to get other work. So yeah, thanks. Thursday, we're going to get into the operator instrument. Saturday, we're going to work on a project by Jacob Schulman, who's been in all these classes, who has done something with only operator samples, patches. And so we're going to make our own kind of arrangement of his piece. Yes, I'm seeing some questions. I'll answer these questions. I'm seeing some questions about the my chord fold trick. And I actually made a really succinct tutorial video about this. It's my only tutorial video. I would make more. It's just so time consuming to do it well. But there is the video. So that explains to you how to do it. I've modified my technique a little bit, which is that when I make the scale, I don't drag it to the right, I drag it to the left. So you can do it like this, select it, drag it off to negative space, and fold around that. Transposing. So yeah, transposing, there's a couple of different ways to do it. There are some effects. The Midi effect called pitch transposes everything that flows through it by a certain number of semitones. You can also use the scale Midi effect, and it'll actually filter, or rather like push around your notes to fit into a single scale. But while I find this is really good if you've got like random stuff happening before and you want to filter what comes out, when I'm writing, I find it a lot better to use the fold scale trick so that I actually see all the notes here. That way I'm actually writing the notes that I see. If I use the scale tool, then I could write a note and hear a different note because the scale is processing it to push it into the right scale. So I recommend doing this fold scale trick because then you can really start to just get a feel for theory in Ableton piano roll space. If you're working here and you want to transpose, it's really easy. You just select things and drag. And if you've got a scale folded, then you're transposing diatonically, meaning a single scale. If you turn fold off, then you transpose chromatically, and you keep exactly the same structure, but move it to a different starting point. Cool. I'm going to do another part. So first of all, let's finish this pluck part. So I'm going to call this Ostinato. Classic old Italian music word. So I'm going to transpose this all up an octave. This plucking sound gets more out of tune the farther away you go. I don't know, let's just do like a piano. Definitely don't want to keep that, but I don't want to waste your time. Let me try one more thing. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so my favorite actually was when this repeated twice exactly. Yeah, an ostinato is just any repeating pattern. So you can, a pulsed bass, definitely an ostinato. Joanne 10, if you're working on a higher instrument, easier to transpose before and have the overlapping notes visible on the keyboard. I don't quite understand your question. Maybe you can ask it the same one with different words. Cool, so let's make another part. Let's do a keyboard part. So a keyboard part, you can play all kinds of things on a keyboard, so there's no real definitive one, but often it's taking the chords and doing some kind of interesting rhythm with it. So I'm going to make a new part, pick some kind of keyboard sound. Cool. Classic. Now I'm going to take these chords, and I actually want to do it wholesale. Oh, I doubled this. I should have kept one without. No, that's fine. We'll just hack away at this. So I'm going to copy in this case, because I know that I want my piano to be playing these chords. I'm just going to chop out a good part here and then make it rhythmically interesting. So I'm going to take out the bass, because bass is covered by the bass instrument. And here's an idea for making smooth voice leading. I've just doubled the octaves here, so I've got my triads, but twice. And I'm just going to chop off the bottoms and chop off the tops. So I've got these chords in a narrow ambitus. So right part, boring rhythm. So let me just try to make an interesting rhythm out of this in the first one. Oh, you know what? We could try doing it out of all of them at the same time. So I'm going to select all of these and be working with all of them. Try putting it on beat 2. So this would be kind of like a ska offbeat thing. That's kind of nice. We could do better. Not convinced about this first one though. Here at the end. And then once you have a part, you know, a pianist isn't just going to play something so simple as this. Maybe they will do some different voicings. Like if a chord is going to happen twice, maybe the second time the voicing is a little different. Some kind of, you know, decoration. Maybe we'll take this, copy it up an octave, arpeggiate it down. Level might be adding a little bit of melodic activity, and so I still have my scale folded here, so I can be free to just play around. Though that's kind of my ostinato idea. The ostinato is already doing melody stuff. With those couple of notes, but you could try adding tones. That you add in, and like little bits of melodic thinking, like this top note makes a kind of a nice arc through, so that's a little melodic activity, and then rhythmic variation and things. That's going to make more and more a human piano part, the way a pianist would play it. Cool. It's really hard to ignore sounds when you just don't like them. probably should have picked sounds before class so that I could instantly make something that sounds awesome for you guys. But okay, let's do one more. So oh, now I understand THC Rain. For accidentals, if you want to use them, if you don't have them, just add them so you can always unfold to see all the notes. Or you can unfold and add them over here, like there's my F sharp, and then copy them into each octave, the way that I do in that tutorial, and then fold, and then you have them. So really just any of the notes that you want to use, put into that initial, put that into your initial scale and fold around them. Joanne 10, yeah. Okay, now I understand. So, yeah, each synth is going to play in a particular octave. They're not all going to play in a standardized octave. So you may need to transpose parts up or down, but I recommend just doing it explicitly and not using the effect. Doing it explicitly, I mean, just selecting the notes and holding down shift and doing the up arrow or the down arrow. And I think that that's better than using the Midi effect to transpose, because then you're actually seeing what you're hearing. Hey, Mary Reckmus, thanks so much for subscribing, which reminds me, Twitch Prime, if you have Amazon Prime, you can hook it up to Twitch and subscribe to this channel, and I'll make a little money from that each month, and it won't cost you any money if it's the first Twitch Prime sub that you've done. So that exists. It's a free way for you to help me out. Okay, so let's do a melodic part. All of these have so far been accompaniment textures. So let's write a melody here. I'm going to make a copy of this track. I'm going to pick an instrument. Cool. So a melody, to go back 2 weeks to our melody class, is a line that can be easily sung. And so it's a line with more steps than leaps. It's a line within a relatively narrow range, like an octave or an octave and a half. It's only one note at a time, and it has space to breathe. So, and they usually have nice arcs. A good melody has some kind of simple, clear curvature to it, either on the huge macro scale or in each subphrase, or both. So here's how, one way to do it is just to make a line and then adjust notes that don't sound right until they do sound right. But I'm going to show you a more fastidious, explicit way to do it, which is to start with a lattice like this, which is just my chord progression doubled into 2 octaves. I'm going to cut out the bass, and then I'm just going to first start with a first draft that just uses chord tones. And I'm going to do this non-destructively by selecting notes I don't want and just muting them by hitting 0. So I'm just going to like carve a pathway through here. I want a high point like 2/3 of the way through to give a nice climax to it. And I just want a variety of like motion, steps up and down, leaps up and down. And I'm just going to kind of eyeball this. I'm not even going to listen at first. Do, 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 do. So let's hear it in context. Okay, so that's a pretty boring melody rhythmically. It has a nice shape. Da 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 dum. What are we? Da da dum bum bum bum. It's got a nice leap, a mix of stepwise motion and leaping motion, and a mix of upward and downward motion. But it's boring rhythmically because it just moves one note per bar. So I'm going to make these short notes and try to fill in the spaces with some stepwise motion, give it some rhythmic variety. Don't do each of these on the downbeat. Bum. Maybe extend some over the bar so they stretch out a little bit. Maybe connect this down. Maybe do a bounce down and up to this note. Maybe a kind of arpeggio here just to get some variety. Though this isn't particularly melodic to have a bunch of leaps in a row. Well, maybe you need a space to breathe at this point. Da dum ba da 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 dum bum. And now I want to do some falling. When you do a leap up, it's really nice to balance it with some stepwise motion down. So maybe I step down to here and end on this chord tone instead. So this melody is guaranteed to fit in with the chords because I'm using the chord tones in any given moment as prominent notes. If I'm leaping to a chord tone, or just like it's prominent because it's most of the bar, or it's on the downbeat, or it's lep 2. I just felt the line holding longer and this thing sliding down faster. I highly recommend you sing along, even if you can't sing. Just like moan along with your melodies. It will really help connect it to your natural physical musical intelligence. This is a little stodgy, this rhythm, and I feel, so I'm moving on beat 2 in this bar, and I felt that I wanted to repeat that rhythmic idea in this bar. So this is dum, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, okay, so that's how to write a more melodic part. Great question, Maddie Few. At this point, what else would you want to add to this piece? Like, what would my next steps be? So One thing I'm hearing missing in this texture so far is something high. There's really no high frequency information in here, except kind of the buzzing of that lead part. So I would add some drums. Whatever these are. I would make something up high, like maybe this piano. Oops. Taking this piano part, transpose it all up. Turn it down. I would do some sound design now and pick sounds that I actually like, that make a kind of a cool sound world together. I might duplicate this whole thing. So an 8-bar phrase, that's solid, but a 16-bar phrase is even nicer. And so I might duplicate it, have it happen again, and just go somewhere different the second time. Maybe towards the end, make it a little different, or maybe make the climax point be a little bit different that second time. And then I have a whole section of a piece. Then I can start thinking about arranging. So I'm gonna do, well, I'm not gonna change the second 8 bars in this moment because I might need to change them in all the parts. But I could at least do something in the drums. Dump, dump, da-dump. And then maybe a backwards sound to swish us into the downbeat. Yeah. So I would make a 16-bar structure like this, and then I'd glue it all together. Command J will glue each of these rows into a 16-bar unit. That's not actually crucial. Maybe I'll leave them as 8 bars. Then I would make a big fat block of them. And then I would cut things away to create a form of a song. So maybe maybe we start with the pad and then bring in the ostinato on the second round. So this is my melody. And then bring in the drums with a drum fill. Yeah, great note, THC Rain. Likes to use markers to plot out initial arrangement around this point. I am also a fan of this technique where you make an empty MIDI track and create regions. I start just like this. I make a 16-bar loop and I duplicate it out. And maybe I name one like chorus and one bridge, though bridges are usually 8 bars. And then use that as a starting point to hang my structure on. But often I'll just do 16 bars first as kind of guideposts and then start to figure out my form as I go. So I'm gonna just start here, bring in the ostinato and the piano. When you bring one thing in, it's nice to bring in something else just to have some coordinated articulation of the form. Then I want to bring in chords, quieter. try to create a structure where something significant, whenever a big section loops, something changes about it, like some new part comes in or goes away. And then when you're bored with it, switch to a new idea. Maybe keeping the same instruments, but give them a different chord progression, or maybe introduce new sounds. And then when you've done your other idea for a little bit, come back to the original idea, do it bigger, better, and do an outro. And that's a good song structure. Yeah, there's one advantage to doing this to markers and one big disadvantage. One advantage is that you can quickly select and loop a whole section of the song, or quickly select and play a section of the song. Though you can do, of course, play from a marker, so that's the same. Yeah, I use this for looping. It's also just visually kind of nice to me. But of course, the big downside is when you have a big chart, a big layout, you've got to scroll up to see it. So sometimes I end up moving it around, or that's usually when I start being like, okay, screw it. Now I'm going to do my locator so that I can see the same thing on all my tracks. Whether or not you do it this way or the other way, it's fine. I also suggest, and I did a whole class on this if you want to go back to one of the intro classes on arranging and song form, but just drop some other song that you like into Ableton and use this or the markers to map out what its structure is, and then get rid of it and compose your own thing in that structure. Yeah, second show. I love this subtractive way of working. It reminds me of like a sculptor, you know, Michelangelo. Like, I'm going to carve away everything that doesn't look like the David or something. You start with a big block. It can be one thing over and over again, or if you have a bunch of materials in your sketching area, just filling the space with stuff, even if it's all disorganized. And then listen through in order and cut things out and move things around as ideas strike you. And that, for me, is a much better way to get my hands dirty and get into the flow of the song than like one by one trying to build up the texture. Yeah, this works especially well if you're doing something without a whole lot of different sections, but with lots of different layers that come and go, like a house or trance track or something. This is really great for loopy kinds of pieces, but also works for song forms too. You just need to have a contrasting idea for a chorus, but same things apply. Okay, everybody. I've got to get back to work, but this was really fun. Hope this was useful for you. Give me a shout if it was. Subscribe to the channel, click above. You can follow me on YouTube also for more of these tracks. More of these, for the videos of these classes, if you want them to pop up there. Come on back. Thursday, we're diving into operator. Tuesdays are creative and composition kinds of classes. Thursdays are technical deep dives into instruments and effects classes. And then Saturday is more kind of a community class where we take a look at one of your projects and talk about how to make it better, and I can show you what I would do with it. So yeah, keep in touch. Sign up for the email list. Also, I have a course webpage down below. I send a notice about it each week. And that'll also give you access to all the past classes, like the intro series. If you're new, there's a 7-part intro sequence that I will be happy to share with you. Cool. Thanks for coming by. Hit me up with questions. Oh, there's also a Discord chat if you want to sign up down below and join a chat room. There's a bit of a community going on, conversing on various related topics, and you can pop work that you create there, and I'll give you some comments. Last, I also do private lessons, and you can schedule down below. I'm happy to meet with you for free for 10 minutes. It's really awesome when one of you pops up in my schedule and I get to meet one of you. So come by, say hi, see you soon, and have a great week.